Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I'm your host Nathan P. Butler, author of A Saga on Home Video, the second edition of which is available as paperback, hardback, or Kindle copies over on Amazon at this point. Might make a nice late Christmas gift or a way to spend some Christmas cash if you happen to be a fan of Star Wars Home Video collecting. Yeah, I said I'd plug it in the last thing that I did, and then this one, and then the next one, and then I promise I will stop because I probably won't be recording around the holidays anymore anyway. This is the 12th in our series of Q&A episodes for From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I will be answering questions posted back in the comments to number 11. Okay, so if you want to have any questions answered in number 13 when it comes around, make sure you put your comments here underneath episode 12. I always grab the questions from the previous episode to use in the next. I'll only be recording one of this format at this point, but I always try to note that if I do record them in batches, look for the ones wearing the same shirt to know when it's a different recording session so that I can gather your questions appropriately. You always want to make sure you put the questions on the newest one or you might miss them. Almost got tripped up there. Whew, I'm very dry right now. It's very cold in the Atlanta area right now. Between sinus medicine and everything else, I'm kind of like right now, but we will get through this and another episode that spins off of one of these questions. So let's dive into our questions posted under Q&A 11. We start out with Vintage VHS Treasures 4058, who asks, two questions. Number one, which release of the Complete Saga Blu-ray set would you recommend getting and why? The original release from 2011 or the reissue from 2015? And number two, I recently rewatched the episodes on the different releases of Spaceballs. Why do you think MGM decided to reissue the original 2000 DVD release of Spaceballs in both 2005 and 2006, and with every Blu-ray edition starting in 2009, despite them already releasing a 2-disc edition with a new transfer and new extras a year earlier in 2005? So I'll actually answer the second of those first, and that is probably just more cost-effective for them. I mean, to them, it was just, let's just keep spewing this same freaking thing out there over and over again to try to make money. And probably the cost would have been a little bit better, I would imagine, for these rarely used double-sided, single-layer on either side DVDs relative to a dual-layer DVD for production. Also, remember that when it came to that collector's edition, there was a film disc and a special features disc. So it kind of made sense to keep them together. And if they were just going to use one disc each time they reissued, that one disc would have just been the film disc. Kind of weird to have that there with the bonus disc. They would have had to relabel the thing because it says disc 1. I think just from a production standpoint, it was a matter of basically laziness or simply cost cutting, especially when it came to just including a DVD in with the Blu-rays, because the Blu-ray was the product they were trying to sell. It's just the Blu-rays, sometimes coming with DVDs, was still a thing back then, so it was just an added bonus to get people to be like, oh, I guess there's value here to buy it. At least that would be my assumption. I doubt there was any reason, content-wise, not to put out the one from the collector's edition again. I think it was all just a matter of, hey, let's take the path of least resistance. To answer your other question about which version of the Complete Saga is the best one to get, 2011 or 2015, the answer is neither. If you look up here, there's actually 3. 2011, in this sort of fancy packaging that a lot of folks dislike because of how you have to get the discs out. 2015, the other one that you referenced, in a standard case, which makes it a lot easier to get the discs out. But then in 2017, you have the Walmart exclusive version labeled as the 6-movie collection, which is basically a slipcover on a slipcover that also, as you saw fall out there, includes the Forces of Destiny bonus DVD only found in those 2017 holiday reissues at Walmart, which includes Forces of Destiny Volume 1, the only time anything from Forces of Destiny has been on physical home media. So if you're looking for the one that I would recommend, best bang for your buck, best as a collectible, get the one for 2017 from Walmart if you can find it. Again, the outer cover looks like this. It's called 6-Movie Collection, not Complete Saga, but as soon as you take it off, it's Complete Saga underneath. If you are just choosing between 2011 and 2015, it's a matter of packaging preference, really. I personally go for the one for 2015 because it's just easier to get to the discs inside it, but your mileage will vary. Then we have one here from the DMB Network 7838, and I don't know why there's those numbers after these names. I think most of the time I've seen them, they haven't had numbers behind them, but whatever. But anyway, from the DMB Network 7838, we have, hello there again, Nathan. Which do you think is more interesting? The 2001 Videovan VCD release of the original trilogy special edition, or the 2000 Japanese Laserdisc of The Phantom Menace? Well, it kind of depends on how you define interesting, and I don't mean in an oh god, we're all going to die, Firefly Serenity sort of way. But in general, I would say that the Japanese Laserdisc of Phantom Menace is by far more interesting. It's really the way to get a Laserdisc of the Phantom Menace, because in the US, the product line for Star Wars, at least for Laserdisc, died right before that, so we did not get one of those. You do see them in some other places, like original trilogy sets, like in 2000 from Japan and stuff like that still, though. It also has an amazing sound mix, a Dolby 5.1 EX, I believe it is, sound mix, or Dolby Digital Surround EX sound mix. It is probably the single best way to watch the original theatrical cut of The Phantom Menace, and it is highly sought after by collectors in its pristine form with the Obi and everything else. The VCDs you refer to, which are from 2000 rather than 2001, I did double check to see if there was an issue with that. Mine still has the sticker from Malaysia on it that has the 2000 date on it, not just the copyright date and whatnot. I mean, it was interesting to see a VCD release of the original trilogy alongside seeing the release in Malaysia of The Phantom Menace. Then, of course, we would eventually see releases for the other films and whatnot. But there's not really anything particularly special about it. It's just highly imported into the US. VCD was just kind of the thing, a format in other regions. There's really nothing to make it special other than the fact that, hey, it was Star Wars and people were starting to import it. Although I think with Phantom Menace, it was Star Wars. It was a place to get it when most places couldn't get it. But there's also the audio thing and just the quality of the presentation for that Laserdisc. So if you're asking me to choose what I find most interesting of those two, the Laserdisc from 2000 to Phantom Menace wins it hands down. Then this one comes from Hamish Trent 1744. I really wish I knew where these numbers were coming from, if those are parts of usernames or not. But in any event, this is a question I do not believe I'm going to be able to answer because I can't really understand what's being asked, I think. So prefacing this with, if you would like to ask this again, feel free, put them in the comments on this episode so I can look at it next time, but you're probably going to need to include some links to images or tell me exactly what it is that you're talking about, because based on this description and just looking up even listings for these products on Australian eBay didn't clarify what's being asked here. So maybe somebody else will know, perhaps, hence going ahead and reading it here. The question is, hello, aha, I have a question which is starting to bother me. I've been looking at a 1995 Star Wars VHS widescreen Australian version on eBay, but when looking at the sticker on the top, they all have the Star Wars name and title, whereas the not widescreen version, presumably the full screen version, it just has a warning except Return of the Jedi. I'm sorry for this long comment, but I had to ask for your help. And then a follow-up comment, but yet there are also ones that are from Australia that just have warnings on the top, even Return, which should have its title on the top. What should I do? And I have no idea what is being referred to here. I'm not an expert, certainly, on that era of Australian releases. I do have some of the Australian releases from then, but I just don't know what this is actually asking. So if somebody can parse that out and actually knows the answer, feel free to put it in the comments. And Hamish Trent, feel free to put it back in the comments and give me like some visuals to be able to look and see. But I think my answer is probably going to be I have no idea, because I'm not terribly familiar with that era of Australian releases. Then we have a comment or a question here from Anvin33, who asks, do you think any of the Disney Plus Star Wars series will ever be released on physical media? I have answered this question multiple times in different places, including within the Q&A series, so I will answer this in kind of a short version, which is that my answer is probably not. They might, but it will require Disney Plus to become even less profitable than it is right now, probably, to get them to want to make profit from those home media releases. But we're dealing with a company who generally does not put their stuff, at least TV stuff, onto home video at all most of the time. And when they have in the recent past, most of the time it's DVD, not Blu-ray or 4K. So it doesn't seem like it would be a good fit to do that anyway. You see some companies doing that, like Paramount Plus putting out seasons of Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, I guess, and stuff like that on home media. But we're just not seeing anything of the kind for Disney yet, even for the earliest Star Wars stuff, the earliest Marvel stuff. There within the Disney Plus library. So my guess is they will keep it as an exclusive streaming draw, not even make it available for purchase digitally. I do think if they did make it available for purchase, digitally would certainly be what they would lean more towards than purchases physically, because there's no production costs there to go along with it, and they're already leaning heavily digital anyway. But as I said, I've addressed that in a little bit more detail in terms of the economics of it and whatnot in some previous Q&As. Speaking of economics, a question here from Brian Sales. Brian Sales 1615. Those numbers. He asks, Nathan, since you're an economics teacher as well as a Star Wars home video expert, could you please give me an explanation about supply and demand in relation to Star Wars DVDs? 5 years ago in 2017, I bought a copy of the 2006 Return of the Jedi widescreen limited edition DVD, still sealed in plastic from a Goodwill thrift store for $3.99, because I thought I could turn it around and sell it for a lot of money. I quickly found out that even though it is an out-of-print product labeled limited edition, there's a lot of supply on the secondary market and seemingly not enough demand for them to justify the high prices that are being asked by sellers. If the supply and the demand don't justify the prices, why do sellers keep the prices artificially high? It's the economics wheelhouse! Sweet. So, first of all, the limited edition label on those is pretty useless for the most part. There were tons of them. There were different versions of them. They reissued them in the box set in 2008. I mean, they didn't last a long time on the market, but calling them a limited edition was kind of a misnomer, I think, on the actual products themselves, personally. There has been a point where there was a high demand for those, but not overly so, at least these days. And I would say that there's a couple of things that play into this here. One is, remember the different markets may operate differently. Different markets on different scales, for example. You have supply and demand that come together to give you prices. Short version of this, and this will be a little bit tricky because I'm trying to figure out how to do this on the screen. I think I got to go opposite of the way it would look to me. So you've got demand, right? Demand is generally, if we want to simplify it, sort of a downward sloping line, right? If price is your vertical axis, quantity is your horizontal axis, demand is a downward sloping line. Why? Because it represents the willingness and ability of people to buy, and typically we are willing to buy a higher quantity of something when prices are lower, and we are willing as a society, as a community, as individuals, to buy less of something when the price is higher. That's why sales work, essentially, right? Lower the price, drive in enough people, it raises your sale numbers high enough that hopefully you make money rather than losing money by dropping the price, because demand slopes downward. Then you got supply, which is the opposite, which is essentially a line that slopes upward on that same price quantity kind of axis. So it's kind of shooting off into the sky. Why? It's the willingness and ability of the sellers or the producers to produce and sell that product. Typically it's thought as to sell the product, but if you wrap in them being the producers also, it all kind of becomes one thing. It's a seller's side of things. And for them, the key is profit and the higher profit margin. And the more they can sell something for relative to the cost that they produced it for, the more they're going to be willing and able to sell that thing to try to get as much profit as possible out of selling that on whatever price the market is going to bear for that. So you have essentially an upward sloping and a downward sloping line. They come together. They form essentially an X type of shape. Wherever they cross, that is going to be your equilibrium point. That is going to be the market clearing price, as it is sometimes called. That is the price that the market will tend to gravitate towards. And the reason for that is just normal human behavior, right? If a price is set too high, right, there's your supply and demand, then if you look at where it crosses the supply and demand lines, it's not the same place. And if the price is set too high, you're going to find that the quantity that sellers are out there trying to put on the market is way more than the amount that people are actually willing and able to go out and purchase of that product at that price. So eventually, sellers are going to start putting it on sale to move the product, say, look, you know, we need to sell this stuff, we'll lower the price, just buy our stuff. Down goes the price towards the equilibrium point. Flip it around, price is too low, way more people are out there trying to purchase it than there are items actually being put out on the shelves because the companies can't make enough profit off of it, they're not producing as much of it, and instead you're in a situation where basically the supply, the quantity supplied is far less than quantity demanded. So essentially if the price is too high, you have a surplus, right? Greater quantity supplied than demanded. If the price is too low, you have a shortage, greater quantity demanded than supplied. But at that point, people will say, look, I'll go on eBay or whatever, I'll pay you more, just make sure I get one, right? And up goes the price, either way squeezing towards essentially the equilibrium point there where the price should be, theoretically. But that assumes the whole marketplace and all the different buyers and sellers that are in it. One reason why you might see things sell for higher on a place like eBay than you would in, say, a thrift store, a local thrift store, especially if it's a thrift store that doesn't have an online component to it or anything like that to sell off that inventory, is that thrift store is a much smaller clientele, a much smaller demand area, where the demand might be even lower than it would be most other places, such that to be able to move that product, the price needs to be significantly lower than it otherwise might be, say, on somewhere like eBay. So one aspect is just the different markets, the components of the buyers and sellers and the individual markets being potentially different. But I think the real key to this, for the most part, if we're just thinking about eBay in general, is that whole issue of essentially a surplus. That's what we're seeing. We are seeing sellers who see that at some point there was demand for this, and they think that they've got a gold mine in their hands because it's Star Wars and it's a craze and it's selling, that they're going to put it up there for higher prices. But then what happens? A lot of them don't sell. You wind up with a surplus. They're sitting there at high asking prices, but not being sold much at those prices. And I say much because remember, it's a sloping line, right? There are some people on the far end of that line who are going to be willing to pay higher. I sometimes will pay a premium for a Star Wars home video product just to make sure that I get it and I get it in good condition and I know that I'm going to have it soon, rather than waiting on an eBay auction to play out or something like that. There will be some willing to pay higher prices to make sure they get their hands on it. So some will sell at those higher prices and trigger eBay to say, look what this is selling for. There's a suggested selling price for you. And then they will put it out there following that. And sure enough, wind up with a price that is way higher than the equilibrium price would be for these to actually move them, and you wind up with a surplus. Again, the only place where there's not a surplus or a shortage, the market clearing price, where everything essentially that is brought to market for sale is sold, and nobody goes away unhappy because the sellers were able to sell their stuff and nobody showed up unable to get it, is only at that one point. And apparently they've got it set higher than that. So they just sit there unsold at these higher prices, and they're dumbfounded. My goodness, why are these things not selling? Somebody bought it for this price at one point. That's what eBay suggested I sell it for. Well, yeah, somebody did. But it's not the typical thing. It's not the going rate. It's certainly not the equilibrium price on the market. So either lower the price or sit there on inventory you're not going to sell. Welcome to supply and demand. And I would say that eBay is one of the places where supply and demand is the most evident and easy to follow, to see happening in real time, especially with auctions, because just the nature of how that platform works relative to all the other factors when companies are selling things as the initial point of sale for those products rather than secondhand. So, yeah, I mean, they produced way more of them than the limited edition name makes people think there would be. You have a few people buying for higher prices, kind of playing with, by accident, not intentionally I don't think, but playing with sort of the algorithm used by eBay for suggested prices. You have people thinking they're going to sell for more than they're worth, and instead of lowering the prices, they just let them sit there and linger as a surplus sitting on eBay, where, you know, it'd be nice if they would lower the prices because there are people out there who are willing to pay for it, just not that much, who would then snatch them up. But instead, they leave them sitting at a point where it's like, well, I will only accept this much. Well, okay, then you're not going to sell them. Your choice is that much or nothing, and you're getting nothing, as opposed to your choice being nothing or something higher and actually getting something out of it, right? But that's what, again, that's why supply and demand are thought of as the willingness and ability to buy or sell stuff, depending on which one we're talking about, because it is a matter of at what threshold are you willing to sell and at what threshold are you not willing to sell. And apparently there are some people out there who are willing to put them up there for those higher prices, but unwilling to lower them because maybe lowering it would take them out of the supply entirely, because for those lower prices, they're just not willing to sell at all. So yeah, it's just kind of a nature of supply and demand thing, but I definitely believe that at least when it comes to things like that are fairly common and easy to get your hands on, a lot of the prices that we see on places like eBay, especially with listings that just keep coming up and coming up and coming up and coming up and never get sold, it is a question of essentially creating a surplus by pricing the starting bids or buy it now prices on those items just too high for what the market will actually bear at this point. And then lastly, a question from Jeff Kahn, who asks, "Hiya Nathan, I have a very specific question, and it's one that will probably take you quite a while to figure out. How many copies of A New Hope do you own? I mean the total number you own, whether official, non-official, or homemade, such as taped off TV or burned off the web. No matter if they're on disc, tape, or film, or if they are domestic or foreign releases. Also, in how many different formats? If you could list the different formats you have A New Hope on, that would be much appreciated. Thanks." And this question is not going to be answered here. I will add some caveats to this, like the fact that I'm not going to include bootlegs or fan restoration projects or anything like that, but only official releases. But I will be answering this question and telling you how I was able to do so when I actually didn't think there was any way in hell I was going to be able to answer the first part of this question in a separate video. That video will not just look at A New Hope, but look at all the live-action Star Wars films as I go through and rank, as an episode of From the Star Wars Home Video Library, the Star Wars films in order in terms of how many copies of each I actually own. I think that'd make for a kind of a fun, weird thing for those who've been following this collection for years, because we are coming up on, 2023, late 2023 will be the 10th anniversary of this series. I thought that might be an interesting separate video. So I will not answer it here, but suffice to say, Jeff Kahn, you will get that answer and more, but slightly tweaked because I'm not going to be including any kind of bootlegs or fan restorations in that count as a separate episode here very soon. So thank you for the question. You just have to wait just a little bit longer. With that, though, thank you very much for your questions, folks. Again, if you want any questions for the next one of these, put them in the comments on this one. I will use the comments from 12 when I record number 13. And as we wrap up here, happy holidays. May the Force be with you. And keep an eye out for that countdown of how many copies I own of each, because that should hopefully be somewhat interesting for those who followed the series. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with the home video viewers.